Hi, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours, where I'm going to answer your questions about the college application process. Before we get started, as usual, I want to start by saying that the advice that I'm going to give is based entirely on the information that I'm provided. If someone writes in and they don't include, enough information about their major or their high school information or their GPA or anything else that might impinge on their admissibility to a school or to their situation, I'm going to have to make some assumptions. And so my advice might be different if I were working with this student full time, because I would have a clearer picture of all of their circumstances and I can ask them questions and things like that. But I'm going to try to give you an independent consultant's perspective on the college application process. So with that, let's look at some questions. So I've got a couple of supplemental essay questions and one activity question today. So it's all nuts and bolts of the application process because it is application season. So first student writes, Far South 4834 writes, should I include selectivity in my extracurricular description? I'm a part of this one program that is really selective. I was one out of 25 students. There were over 2,000 applications. But the program isn't that well known to most people since it's in a niche field. Should I briefly mention the selectivity, maybe like represented the southeastern United States, in my description? I know straight up saying blank acceptance rate isn't ideal, so is there any other way I can highlight the selectivity of the program? So when it comes to the activity section, again, I'm assuming we're talking about the Common App and not the UC app. The UC app gives you a lot more room to play with your description. For the Common App, we're looking at 150 characters in the description. We have an organization name, we have a title. And so I wouldn't personally use the description to talk about selectivity. You should be talking about what you did there and what you learned there. If this was a selective program in a niche field, you were probably doing some pretty cool stuff or learning some pretty cool stuff. You should be talking about that. If in the organization name or in the program name you wanted to include something, you could say like, trying to think of how to phrase it, which is always going to be hard. I don't know if I can phrase it for you necessarily without knowing more about the program, because you could find a way to include that you were one of 25 kids in the group, in either the organization name or in your role, is what I'm thinking. If you wanted to include it at all, I would definitely not use the description for it, but if you're going to squeeze it in somewhere, it's either going in organization or it's going in the title. In general, when it comes to selective activities, it's not the select. For us as students, I get it. The selectivity is important. You're like, this was really hard to get into, so it should be pretty prestigious. What really matters is what we get out of it. What did we do? What did we learn? What did we experience? How are we different / better for having this experience? That's what really matters, not that you were one of 25 kids chosen for something. I would lean towards not including that information anywhere. But if you really were adamant about including it, I would try to find a way to weave it into the role or the organization name, not the description. The description is too short for you to be wasting any space on, I was one of 25 kids out of 2,000 applicants. That's 2,000, that's 5 characters. If we are doing it right with a comma. 25 is 2 more characters, and then 1 is another character. You're using up 5% of your character allotment just on those numbers alone. So it's not worth doing that when you could say something more meaningful about your experience, your impact, what you learned, what you took away from this activity. Last two questions are going to be focused on essays. The Musical Theory writes, I'm not anything special essay. I'm trying to brainstorm some ideas for my essay, but I'm nothing special. I hear that every year. Every year, I hear that. There's always at least one student who has nothing to say or feels like they have nothing to say. The only thing that's ever happened to me was a cross country move freshman year and trying to find out who I am and what I want to do. What can I write an essay about if there's nothing special about me? This is a common pitfall that students encounter when writing their common application personal statement or their UC essays or anything like that. It's not about what's special. And I mean that in the way that you mean special, like outstanding or unique or exemplary, because I'm assuming that's what you mean by special. There's nothing special. If I wanted to be touchy-feely about it and say we're all special in our own ways, but I think that's what you mean by the word special. In reality, what this essay is trying to do, what the purpose of this essay is to tell the application reader something about you that they can't learn from your courses, your grades, your extracurriculars, um, or your recommendation. So really introduce yourself. The personal statement is the one spot where you get to use your own words to describe yourself. So it's not about talking about the big win or the big game or the national award that you won or the thousand ninjas that you defeated. It's not about look at me, aren't I amazing? And in fact, some of those kids who write that way are probably going to come off as kind of obnoxious. And then, it's like, do I want this obnoxious kid at my school? Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe it's like we have a quota of 10 obnoxious kids, right? Not literally, they don't have quotas. We can only take so many obnoxious students before the student body in general is going to be negatively impacted. So we got to balance this out. These essays can be about something that's meaningful to you, something that you really care about, something that you're really passionate about, something that you know, really, really enjoy. I've had students write about anime, video games, whether that's making their own video games or playing video games and experiencing stories and lives of other people. In that same vein, I've had students write about loving to read. I think my first year doing this 11 years ago. I had a student. He was a very quiet kid, very kind of shy. His extracurriculars were okay, the standard stuff: hackathons, robotics. He was a CS kid, wanting to go to Berkeley. Fantastic grades. He had a 4.0 GPA with like a 4.45 weighted. He had like 11 APs. All of them were fives. I forget what his SAT score was, but I think it was in the high 1400s, low 1500s, something like that. His personal statement was about loving to read, which as a CS kid, it's a little different, right? It's not what you would expect. So he talked a lot about the escapism of reading fantasy novels and the sort of like the chance to experience something that's out of the ordinary for him and out of his everyday, learning about heroism, learning about bravery, learning about sacrifice, and all these things that he hasn't had to really experience in his day-to-day life in a cushy part of California. And so you might say, oh, reading. How do you write a whole essay about reading? He got into Berkeley. This was, of course, back before the UCs had the 4 PIQs, and so he could write an essay about reading. But that was his personal statement for the Common App. It was all about reading. He got into some great schools, and he ended up at UC Berkeley, and by now, he's either working in tech or he's in finishing grad school or doing something amazing, I'm sure. But again, the point is to illustrate that we don't have to talk about amazing things. We had a student last year, I think it was last year, who wrote about baking cookies. I'm serious, baking cookies. And I think she wrote about there was a cookie she baked for her dog, but of course her dog couldn't eat it because it had chocolate in it and like all this sort of stuff. Like it sounds a little silly, but her personality came through. She came across as a caring, sort of fun, kind, generous person, And that's the kind of person they wanted at their school. And she had all the other pieces that she needed in order to be like on a pre-med track bio major kind of thing. And I think she's at NYU, if I remember correctly. She's at NYU and she wrote an essay about baking cookies. Like, seriously. So stop thinking about it from this perspective of like, what is special about me? And instead think about like, what do the admissions people need to know to understand who I am? What is so important to understanding me? What experiences have I had that maybe make me different from other people? And by experiences, again, I don't mean amazing things. I mean, every Thursday I go to this one coffee shop and there's this homeless guy who goes in there and sits. You know, it took me about a month to drum up a conversation with him, and every Thursday I go in there and I buy us coffee, and I learn more about this guy's life. And he's lived a crazy life, and it's ridiculous that he's homeless. And I've learned XYZ about whatever, judging other people, social inequity, you know, whatever you learn about, right? Like, just having a conversation with somebody that has influenced your worldview or really stuck with you in some way can tell an admissions person a lot about who you are as a person and what you value as a person. And again, these essays, the personal statement is 650 words. You cannot cram everything about you into 650 words. It's not possible. Don't try. Don't even try. It's not going to work. We're picking one little narrow, teeny tiny slice of who we are, and we're telling them about that one teeny tiny slice. And hoping that that teeny tiny slice gives them a taste of the whole pie. Or if you prefer, the whole cake. Or if you're a pizza person, the whole pizza. Right? That's what we're trying to do. So come at it from that perspective. And really look at the prompts. Look at what they're asking. Most of them ask us for a specific story or a specific example. Tell us about a time, once, where you challenged a belief or idea. What was the outcome? They don't necessarily need to know about the time you stood up in front of an entire church congregation and challenged their beliefs on abortion. Right? It's one instance. It could be as simple as like, why do we do this thing this way when obviously it has a lot of problems? Like it could be in a class. It could be with a friend. It could be in a club or extracurricular that you're in, right? This is one story. So don't think so large. It doesn't have to be large. It can be large. It doesn't have to be large. Plenty of people out there don't have huge things to talk about, myself included. I think one of my essays was about my own family history and how knowing that my family sort of dates back to the 1620s, and you know I can trace my family from like here to Missouri to Virginia to Massachusetts. I know I had ancestors on both sides of the Civil War, and one of my great whatever, however many generations back, uncles rode with Paul Revere, and he was part of the Revolutionary War, and so like that really influenced my interest in history, because for me it wasn't a bunch of dead people and events from 300 years ago. It was part of my history. I was connected to it in a meaningful way. And so that was one of the reasons I chose history as my major. And so that's what I wrote about. And then I think I had to write like a talent or skill essay. And I talked about teaching and how much I love teaching. And, you know, I had been working part-time. And in my part-time job, the thing that I loved the most was actually talking to customers and selling them stuff. And I realized it wasn't because I liked selling. The selling part wasn't like the most exciting thing. Of course, I got paid for that, and so I liked it. I liked the money. But what I enjoyed about the selling was like solving their problem and teaching them about something that they didn't know about before. You know, showing them like hey, what problem are you trying to solve? What do you need? What do you need to do? Hey, let me show you this cool thing, and I'll show you exactly how it'll solve your problem and make your life easier. And if I can show you that thing that solves your problem, you're probably going to want to buy that thing, right? And so that it was that educational aspect and that problem solving aspect and seeing people like light up when they're like, oh my God, my life just got easier. Like this thing that's been bugging me is now going to be done. And so I wrote an essay about liking to teach and how I wanted to be a teacher. Those aren't special, right? In fact, it's rather cliche now that I think about it. Like one of the things I think I wrote about was that aha moment when a student sort of like when it clicks and they're like, oh, I get it, right? I learned later when I started talking to other teachers that like a lot of us like that feeling. That's a dopamine rush for a lot of teachers. That's why they do what they do. And so the essay I wrote was rather cliche, honestly, if I were to sort of zoom out and take a macro view of it. But um, it was meaningful to me, and the way I talked about it was unique to me, and so it worked, right? Okay, moving on. Second supplemental question. That's enough about that. I could ramble. I could yap at you all day. Okay, Honeydew Capital writes, does this supplemental sound too stupid? I mean, the answer is going to be probably not, but let's see. I'm writing the Sanford excited about learning supplemental, and I want to talk about my passion for math, but more specifically, a short little project on data collection. I saw a TikTok that was about how it's basically impossible to know the number of individual unique bathrooms that you have used in your lifetime. I decided to try and figure out part of this and recruited my friends on our school trip and had them all log the new bathrooms they visited in a Google Sheet. At the end, we would do some math and try to find a bathroom constant, which would roughly estimate how many new bathrooms you would use anytime you went on a school trip. I know this sounds immature for being a mature person tracking how many bathrooms you and your friends use, so I was wondering if this is something I should use or maybe just circle back with a new idea. Honestly, it sounds kind of awesome. The fact that it's about bathrooms, like, I can see the students' concern about, like, ha ha ha, we're counting bathrooms, ha ha. But that's not what you're doing. You came across a question or like a piece of information where someone kind of challenged you and said, "Hey, this is something that's unknowable." Like, where was it? Some TikTok you saw that was like, "Hey, did you know that this is like an unknowable thing? You can't know this." And in theory, you could. Like, if you started as a child and you began purposefully counting, you could know it. But no one does that. And so, that's why it's unknowable, is no one thinks to do that. And so you were challenged to, like, hey, here's this unknowable thing. How would I figure out the answer to this unknowable thing? And that's what you're really doing. The fact that it's about bathrooms gives it some, pardon the gross pun, but it gives it some flavor, right? Like the fact that it's about bathrooms makes it stand out a little bit. You're like, oh, huh, bathrooms. Interesting. But really what's happening here is you were challenged by this video that said this thing is unknowable, and you were like, you want to bet? I'm going to try to figure this out as like part of it. If you can figure out part of it, then maybe you can extrapolate, right? And so what this essay is really about isn't counting bathrooms. It's about knowing something or figuring out a way to systematically discover the answer to something that somebody else said you couldn't figure out. And I think that's a pretty good trait to have, especially if you're trying to be like a data science person or a math person or an engineer, right? Like solving previously unsolvable problems is how we end up with smartphones. It's how we end up with, you know, bridges that seem impossibly large or impossibly long. It's how we end up with planes that can break the sound barrier and trains that can break the sound barrier. It's how we end up with maglev technology. It's how we end up with all sorts of cool stuff. And so, is this too stupid? No, not at all. No way. I think this is pretty interesting. And so, coming up with like a bathroom constant, also, it's kind of funny. Just like a bathroom constant. I love that. Like here's this statistical piece of data about bathrooms. I would absolutely encourage you to write this. This sounds super fascinating to me, and you can get into the nitty gritty details about how you tracked the data and how your friends tracked it and what you guys did with it after and how you created this, um, how you created the formulae and the algorithms that created this constant, right? This would be great for an excited about learning or like celebrate your nerdy side. There's a lot of those sorts of essays. Talk about an activity or a project that you've done, right? Like there's a lot of supplemental essays where this would be an amazing thing to write about and it stands out. And I could see, again, it's nothing, to go back to that previous prompt, it's not like special, but it's just like a fun thing that you did because you wanted to try it. And it tells me a little bit about you. And I learned that you're also pretty good at the data and math part too. And so, um, I can imagine like an admissions person being like, "Oh, did you read the bathroom essay or like the bathroom constant essay?" People be like, "The bathroom constant? What do you mean?" Like, "Oh, the one about math and how many bathrooms you've used." Oh no, like what? I could see you would become the bathroom constant applicant in an admissions office, and so I think that would be, it's memorable, it's sticky, it sticks in my head. And so I think that's absolutely something you should write about. Like, don't shy away from the fact that it's bathrooms. Even though you might feel like that's immature, I think this is a perfect essay to write. But stick with, or like come at it from that frame of like, this was a challenge. I heard this thing and I thought, I bet I could figure that out or figure part of that out and then get into it, right? No, I think this is wonderful. I would absolutely encourage you to write this. In fact, I would love to read it if I could read the finished product. That sounds awesome. So, anyway, that's all I have for you today. We had the two questions on supplementals, and then the one other question on selective activities. And so, if you have questions that you want to ask me, you can email me at collegequestions@dawsacademics.com, or you can reach out to me through Instagram or Facebook or through the YouTube comment section below, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching. So, if that video helped you, then please help me by liking, sharing, and subscribing or following on whatever social media platform you prefer. Doing so really helps allow me to do what I like to do, which is help students and families manage the college application process. And if you're looking for more targeted support yourself, there's a link in the description that'll allow you to book a consultation with me, and we'll see how I can help. It's free. Anyway, thanks again for watching.